Today we're going to be talking about how to filter tables with SQL. Now we're super familiar with how to filter things in Excel, and actually the way that we filter things in SQL is really similar, which we'll see shortly. Now just as a reminder, if you want to follow along, I recommend this dbfiddle website. When you open this website, you can click on SQL Server. That's the flavor of SQL that we're using for all of these videos. And I recommend choosing the AdventureWorks database. That will give you access to all the sample data that I'm using in these videos, so you can run exactly the same SQL that I'm running. Now, I'm not going to be using dbfiddle for this video. I'm going to be using a different application, a different piece of software that I like to use for SQL, but it doesn't matter. As long as you're using something that can run the SQL, you'll be able to follow along with what we're doing today. Now, just a quick recap. What did we cover before? Well, we've covered select and from. Select is how we tell SQL what we want to see in the output. And from is how we tell SQL which data we want to use, which table we want to select from, which file we want to open. Whatever way you want to think about it. We use from to point to where the data lives, and we use select to tell SQL what we want to see. Every time we write code, we then need to run it. Once we run the code, we'll get an output. So let's start with Excel. How do we filter things with Excel? Well, we just whack on a filter, and then we choose the particular values that we want to keep, the particular conditions that we want to be true in order to filter this table. So we could filter the department ID to be 5. We will just pick 5 in the drop down and hit apply. How would we do the same thing with SQL? The special word that we use is where. And in the where clause, we then need to list the conditions that we want to be true. In this case, we just want the department ID to equal 5. I've written my code. I now need to run it. And you can see that we get the same output. I've not asked for group name and modified date, which is why I'm only seeing department ID and name. But remember, we can add those on if we want. So we can add group name, we can add modified date. I've updated my code. I now need to rerun it. And now we can see that the output looks the same as the one on the left. We've done the same thing as what we did in Excel. What if we wanted to filter for something else? So we'll clear this filter. And to clear a filter in SQL, we just delete the condition. Let's say I now want to filter where the group name is sales and marketing. I'll choose sales and marketing and hit apply, and we get 2 rows back. How do we do the same thing with SQL? We'll now choose group name. We want the group name to be equal to sales and marketing. Just like Excel, when we're specifying text, we need to put it within some quotes. Although for SQL we use the double quotes for text, the ones that look like this, we don't use those for SQL. We use the single quotes for text in SQL. So now I've specified that I want the rows where the group name is sales and marketing. I've updated my code. Let me run it. We get the same thing as on the left. We've just done exactly what we did in Excel. Easy peasy. And like I mentioned before, this still reads like an English sentence. I'll chuck in a couple of words just to make it a complete English sentence, but let's read this out loud. We want to select the department ID, the name, the group name, and the modified date from the human resources department table where the group name is sales and marketing. That's such a natural sentence to read. What other kind of filtering conditions can we do? Well, we've used equals, where department ID equals 5. What if we wanted to see the departments whose department ID is less than 5? Well, in Excel, nice and easy. Instead of just, well, of course, we could just go and explicitly click them. If there was a long list, we wouldn't want to do that. Instead, we'd rather use a number filter, and we'd choose less than, and we'd put 5 in this box. So we want the ones where department ID is less than 5. This would give us these 4 rows. How would we do the same thing with SQL? We would just update our equals to a less than. Very, very similar. I've updated my code, now I need to run it. Here we go, we get the same 4 rows. What if I wanted less than or equal to 5? Currently this is a strict less than. What if we wanted less than or equal to? Well, if I go back to my filter, I can choose less than or equal to in Excel. When I update this one, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How would I do the same thing with SQL? We just update the less than to less than or equal to by adding an equal sign after the less than symbol. I've updated my code, now I need to rerun it. Now we get all 5 rows. And it's the same for the other direction, the greater than as well. So if I update my filter, we can do, say, greater than or equal to 10. What's that going to give us? It's going to give us department IDs 10 to 16. How would you do the same thing with SQL? We'll just do greater than or equal to 16. I've updated my code, I need to rerun it. Oh, sorry, 16, 10. We get exactly the same rows. And this still reads like an English sentence. This reads, just chucking a couple of words in, select the department ID and the name from the human resources.department table where the department ID is greater than or equal to 10. It's still really natural English. Some other things that we could do, some more expressive filters. We've already used the equals just by ticking the box. Excel, of course, has a does not equal. So if we wanted the ones where it does not equal 5, that would give us everything except 5. How would we do this in SQL? There's 2 ways. We could use the same not equals symbol that we would use in Excel, the less than then greater than sign. I'll run this to prove that it works. See, we're missing 5. This is one symbol that you could use. You could also use the exclamation mark equals. I'll run that again. We're still missing 5. It's up to you which one you choose to use. If you're coming from the Excel background, you'll probably prefer this version, but it's more common to see exclamation mark equals in other people's SQL code. So just while you're getting up to speed with Excel, maybe stick with up to speed with SQL, sorry, maybe just stick with this one, just because that's what you're familiar with. But then when you're more familiar with SQL, do the more common option of the exclamation mark equals. What if we wanted to select multiple values? We wanted it to be equal to multiple different values. What I mean by that is when we filter in Excel, we have a drop-down list. So we don't need to just select one option. We can select multiple options, say 3, 4, 5. That'll give us the lines for 3, 4, and 5. How would we do the same thing with SQL? Well, we'd still use the where special word. We're still filtering the department ID, but rather than using equals, we would use in. This is saying that we're going to this is telling SQL that we're going to provide a list of numbers that we want the department ID to be in. To specify a list, we need to do some brackets, and then we just write in the numbers separated by commas. In this case, this is me saying that I want the department ID to be 3, 4, or 5. I've updated my code. Let me run it. We get exactly the same output as in Excel. We can just have one item in the list if we want. This is equivalent to doing the equals. But typically you would stick to using in only when you have multiple values that you want to filter on. One of the cool things about Excel is that it allows us to filter by multiple conditions at the same time. So for example, we could take the department ID to be less than or equal to 5, and we can filter the group name to be research and development. We're applying two conditions at the same time. How would we do the same thing with SQL? We'd still use the where special word. We want the department ID to be less than or equal to 5. Now to add additional conditions, we just write and. We want the group name to be equal to research and development. For good measure, let's also add the group name to our output, so that we can confirm that they are all indeed research and development. I've updated my code, now I need to run it. We do indeed get these two rows. Note that each condition individually wouldn't have been enough. If I just filter the group name, we get this additional row. And if I just filter the department ID, we get these 3 additional rows. So we need both conditions at the same time to see just these 2 rows. Of course, if we didn't know that there were department IDs 1 and 2 beforehand. This is exactly the same as what we've done with Excel. But one of the cool things about SQL is that AND isn't the only option to combine conditions. We can also combine them with OR. So we can say either the department ID has to be less than or equal to 5, or the group name has to be research and development, which gives us all 6 of these rows. There isn't such a simple Excel equivalent. Excel filters are always ANDs. The way that you would do an OR, you'd have to go create an extra column, filter on that extra column. So this is one way in which SQL's actually extending filtering in a much nicer way. We can, of course, have as many combinations of ANDs and ORs as we like. So maybe we want the department ID and the group name. I'm just going to put this on a new line just to make it easier to see these all. And maybe we want to filter by the name as well. Say their name is tool design. We now need all 3 of these conditions to be true. If we were to do the same thing in Excel, we'll just make sure that tool design is chosen as well. So 3 conditions in Excel, exactly the same as 3 conditions in SQL. The one thing that I will say about SQL, because you have the option to do ORs as well, be careful mixing ANDs and ORs. What is this going to do? Is this going to be department ID is less than 5 and the group name is research and development together, with then the OR just being the name is tool design? Or would this be that the department ID has to be less than or equal to 5 and either the group name is research and development, or the name is tool design? Well, there are rules in SQL that will mean that you know what the answer would be if you know those rules. But remembering those rules, it's not exactly easy. It's not something that we expect everyone to do. So if you're going to combine ands and ors, make sure that you put brackets in the right place so that you know which conditions are being grouped with your ands and ors. This does take some getting used to. It does take a little while to get used to using conditions that are both and or. So if you can, try and stick to just ands or just ors for the time being, but practice until you're comfortable using ands and ors together. And if you are going to use them together, make sure you put brackets in the right place. These are very different conditions. For the last example, we're going to move over to this employee department history table. So let's open that in SQL as well. Employee department history. Name isn't a column on this table. So let's choose the business entity ID, the department ID, the start date, and the end date. Give this a run just to make sure that the output looks the same. It does. We'll see later on that there's this special value in SQL called null. Excel does actually have this concept. Again, we'll see this later on, but it doesn't really make it explicit. It's just a blank cell in Excel. So if we wanted, say, the rows in this table where the end date is missing, the end date is blank, we would just select the blanks option. How would we do the same thing with SQL? We might be tempted to do end date equals null. This is the special value. But if we try and run this, we don't get anything back. And in fact, the program that I'm using is warning me that this is not what we're allowed to do. Since SQL treats these nulls in a funny way, you can't just use equals with null. Instead, you have to write is null. Let's rerun this to see what we get back now. Now we're getting some results. So if you're trying to compare to anything that is a real value, whether that's a number, a date, or some text, you would use equals. But if you want to check whether it's null, you need to do is null instead. Now, how would we filter where the data is not null, where the data is not missing? Well, in Excel, we'll just flip the condition. We'll select everything and just deselect the blanks. We'll get the six rows where the end date is not missing. And in SQL, instead of is null, we would do is not null. I've updated my code. Let me run it. We get the same 6 rows back. So when you're working with missing data, remember, instead of being equals or not equals, it's always is or is not null. Alright, to wrap up, we've just seen how we can filter data in SQL, how we can filter a table. We use the special where word. We put in conditions using the column and the value that we want that column to be. We can use equals, we've seen not equals, we've seen less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. We've also seen in, if we want to list a set of values that we want the column to be in. And finally, we've seen how we can compare if something is missing. We've also seen that we can combine conditions, either by using the AND special word, or by using the OR special word. And in every case, this still reads like an English sentence. This one, just chucking a couple of words in to make it complete, reads as: select the department ID and the name from the human resources department table, where the department ID is 5, or the group name is research and development. Hopefully you found this helpful, and we'll catch you in the next one.